All right, this is the Yay. I'm Reg Clay.
And Norman G.
This is the Yay, where we talk about life in the theater and the theater of life.
Yay!
We have a fantastic guest. We have a playwright. I believe you're an actress as well, and you're also a bit of a historian. Well, you studied at Oxford. Naseem Badie. Naseem, how are you?
I'm great, thanks.
We were just talking about your what you studied at Harvard, with what's going on with the protests and everything, the political, the conflict that's going on. You studied a little bit of that. Can you talk a little bit about what you studied?
Sure, absolutely. I actually went to Oxford, not Harvard.
I'm sorry about that, Oxford, yeah.
That's okay. So I have a master's and a PhD from Oxford, and my area of research was international development and humanitarian action. I'm a political sociologist.
Wow.
Sounds like you're the perfect guest for today.
Unfortunately, but the area that I focused on, the regional area, was South Sudan, and South Sudan was at war. So Sudan, the country, was in a civil war for 22 years, and then South Sudan separated and they formed their own country. And so I did field work there, focusing on the reconstruction process. So there are a lot of parallels.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was reading, when Norman and I, we did Foreman in Paris, there was a lot of talk about, Ghana, and how, Africa was undergoing a revolution where there were so many countries that were becoming independent during the 60s. And I imagine that some of that is still going on right now, but there's still a lot of unrest as far as separating a lot of African countries from, imperialism and the imperialist culture of either France or not the United States, but England. So was that going on in the Sudan?
Very much so. The conflict in Sudan started basically at the moment of independence. Sudan had been colonized by the British since before Sudan was really an entity, because if you can imagine the geography, the Nile runs through Sudan and it goes through the largest marsh in the world called the Sud. And the south of Sudan is really just undeveloped bush, most of it. I mean, there was one paved road when I went there in this massive region. And the Nile is navigable through the Sud. And so a lot of explorers had gone down there, in the sort of 1930s through the 1960s. These anthropologists from Oxford had gone down there to sort of discover the peoples of South Sudan, who were very diverse, lots of different tribes. Tribe is a very loaded word, but that's how South Sudanese people refer to themselves. They're different ethnic groups. And then eventually, Oxford anthropologists have kind of come to terms with how complicit they were in the colonial enterprise, because what they were basically doing was cataloging the people of South Sudan to make the subjugation easier for the government. The British government. And a lot of them were funded by the British government to go down there and do, discover the different cultures and learn the languages and write it all down. And so now there's this kind of reckoning that's happening amongst anthropologists in Oxford. But another really interesting point is, like, there used to be this department of empire studies, of colonial studies.
Wow.
And when the British Empire fell, it just very quietly changed its name to the Department of International Development and continued as it was before. So it just goes to show you that whole enterprise of international development and international aid and intervention, how it's really a continuation of colonialism and intervention.
Do things our way. Yeah, and it's amazing. I was talking to a friend earlier today. She actually lives in Thailand. And I was telling her about what's happening now. Basically a black man, gets beaten up by a cop and is killed. And she says, wow, that's really sad, but it's not so surprising. I mean, it happens in Thailand. So when we talk about colonialism and, even though a nation may be independent, but yet still, there is a government or there is a culture that wants to still push its own narrative or its own culture on a people. It's sort. We're not used to it here in the United States, but still, with Breonna Taylor and the individual who died in Minnesota. We're sort of getting a taste of that. We're sort of getting a taste of what's happening, out in the world. Norman, how have you been feeling this week? Yeah.
Uh, it's been a crazy week. On a personal level, I got a toothache that is just bugging the heck out of me. So I'm hoping it's just an abscess or something and it'll go away. But
Oh goodness,
that's
yeah,
been my week.
yeah.
And then Dexter graduated Wednesday. So
Oh,
my
good for him.
stepson just graduated high school, and we did the online graduation because of what else can you do?
Yeah, yeah.
Which was fascinating to see how they could bring all the tired and boring cliches of graduation to the internet. It was, because you're watching him and he's just like rolling his eyes and I'm like, well, that's how I felt when I went through it. That's how everybody felt, I think, when they went through it. It's just something you go through. So we got to have that rite of passage. It was very cool.
Very nice. Naseem, you have a little one. I don't think she's of age yet to, how old is she?
She's 7.
7 years old. That's great age. Now, Naseem, here's a question for you. Do you talk to your daughter? I don't know if your daughter is at the age of asking questions. When I was around 7 or 8 years old, the only big incident, there was the bicentennial that happened in 1976. But there was also, Norman and I have been talking about the Atlanta child murders that happened on the East Coast.
Right.
And that was a big thing, and it was big in the news. And I was asking a lot of questions to my mom and dad. Is your little one asking questions about what's happening in the world today, or no?
No, I have, it's really funny. My friends and I are sort of stepping back and rethinking how we talk to our children about race and how we introduce them to the horrors of the world. My approach had been to, never refer to people by the color of their skin when we talk about our friends, but to refer to them by like what they had been wearing, or maybe like, their personality, and to sort of allow her to get to know people before she thinks in terms of labels, and also I don't think she really even knows what war is yet. She goes to this progressive school in Berkeley and they speak 3 languages, and, she has this very privileged life. And I think I wanted to extend her innocence because I'm a child of war and revolution, and I grew up in a house full of trauma and parents always with the news on. So I wanted her to really love people before she thought about the differences between people. But now I think that that's really a luxury and a privilege, and that we need to start having those conversations because I want her to be a change maker in the world, and I want her to be a conscious person. So maybe 7 is a good place to start having those conversations.
Yeah. On some level, sure.
Yeah, and I always thought she has 2 parents who are academics, who can explain the world to her in its subtleties, and that I just always took it for granted that she would be a person who would understand race and politics in a very, holistic way and choose the side of justice. And I just took it for granted that, we would introduce those things to her, and that we wouldn't rely on schools to do it. And I don't need her children's books to do it. Mm-hmm. And that even the things that she thinks are fun, or, the popular culture things, I would give her context for them. But now I think it's really important for her to know the city that she lives in, and to know that the people that she interacts with don't have the same experience of the world as she does. We're brown people. I'm very dark skinned. She's very dark skinned. We're not, but we don't have, there's a very unique experience for every subgroup in a society. Like Sudan is a really good example. North Sudanese and South Sudanese people are both brown skinned Africans, but they have a completely different experience of race. So I think context matters. And in the context of America, we are very privileged. Maybe not as privileged as some people, and maybe if we lived in a particular part of America, we would be more targeted. But I think that with having privilege comes responsibility, and I need to start teaching her that.
Yeah, I think you're doing perfectly fine. I think a child should be a child. And, I know that when I was young, Sesame Street was sort of the outsource of sort of teaching children about race and diversity and sort of getting along together. And I think when a child starts asking questions, you can start saying, okay, well, if you're asking the questions, then I think you're ready to know. And then you can get into the more deeper questions, or when incidences pop up and all of a sudden there's something in the paper and there's something that everyone's talking about in the news, then, it sort of forces, I guess, your hand and sort of saying, well, maybe I should start talking about this. But I think a child should be a child. I don't think, I mean, Norman, was it that? I mean, when you were a child, Norman, I mean, were you curious about things, or were you allowed to sort of be a kid?
Ah! I will never forget. Martin Luther King got killed, and it was all over the news. And there was rioting all over America, right?
That's right, because you were around 10, weren't you?
No, not even. I was, what is that, 68? I was going on 8 years old.
Wow.
That's Summer's age right now.
Yeah. So, and it's weird because you keep making these connections right now to 1968. But as a child, I'm watching, so mom is home, she's cooking dinner, I'm watching the news, and it's Walter Cronkite or whoever telling us all this horrible stuff about what's going on in the country. And I run in and I say, Mommy, they said Martin Luther King died. I hope Michael's going to be okay, my younger brother. And she says, oh, why? And I said, because they said it's going to be a really hard time for black people. He's darker than me. So I was like, so I hope he's going to be okay. And she's like, you're black, fool. And I walked away going, oh, okay, I really don't understand this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we can, and we live in a bubble here in the Bay Area, so it's easy for us to think post-racial or, race and color doesn't really matter. And then you step outside and you realize that, I mean, I remember being in Minnesota. I was in Minnesota with a bunch of friends immediately after a theater gig, and we did a driving thing, and we drove all the way from San Francisco through the Midwest to Minnesota, and it seemed very, very peaceful and warm, and I didn't feel any bad vibes or whatever. And now I'm hearing, in the aftermath of the George Floyd, apparently there's been a lot of things going on in Minnesota. This is usually when I think of an explosion like this, usually it's not just one incident. Like with Rodney King, you have a group of black people saying, hey, this has been going on for a long time, and now this is the tip of the iceberg. And I that's what I take out of this. So that's what I find fascinating, because it's not just George Floyd. They're underneath the whole George Floyd thing. There's some systematic stuff going on.
Absolutely. I mean, we were just talking about colonialism, and what I wanted to say earlier is that America is still very much in the thick of its colonial enterprise.
Right.
The history of America is the history of racism and slavery. It's not inextricable. It's not as if it was an episode in this otherwise, beautiful democratic experiment.
Right.
The entire democratic experiment is intertwined with this horrible colonial subjugation of many different groups of people brought over from a continent for economic purposes. And colonialism, when it was done on site, right, like in Africa or South America or whatever, was very much about slavery. It was about enslaving people into a particular culture or into a particular economy, making servants of people with the guise of sort of civilizing them or educating them or converting them to the right religion. And America is actually behind a lot of African countries in some respects, if you think about it, because we don't talk about that at all. We've somehow managed to put the difficult conversations away by making them taboo to have as a whole country, like on a national level. Like, we don't talk about this at all, coming out of the White House, obviously not now, but even before. I would even argue that President Obama didn't really talk about it. And I think his reasons had to do with, his reasons had to do with like showing how a black president is the same as a white president, right? Like to say, like, I'm the president of all the people in this country. And I think he was right to do that because it was a first.
Yeah.
But we don't even have those conversations when we have a black president. We're so censored in this country.
Yeah, and I think, I think capitalism has a lot to do with it. I mean, we pride ourselves at being the richest country on earth, and we have so many toys. I mean, how do you have a protest where people run out in the street when even the homeless person has an iPhone?
Yeah.
Even when,
Right.
everyone has a TikTok account or a YouTube account, and they're
Mhm.
streaming live on, PlayStation or whatever. So it's easy to get distracted. And, for those who are the imperialists, who are, I would say, let's say a Republican Party, a hardline Republican Party that wants you to be distracted. We don't want you to talk about race. We don't want you to talk about gerrymandering or, poll taxes and, the miseducation. I was reading a book that, a lot of young kids in the Deep South, they were given a history book which totally misinterprets, slavery and discrimination and segregation. So it's easy to get distracted in the United
Yeah.
States. It's easy to, and that's one of the reasons why you're right, Naseem, we don't talk about race.
No, and it's everywhere. I mean, maternal mortality for Black women is so high in this country.
Yeah.
Right? If you're a Black woman and you go to give birth, you're more likely to die than if you're a white woman.
Yeah.
I mean, those are like the sort of daily ways in which we subjugate the bodies of people of color, but also in which we kill them, we let them die. A Black man being attacked violently on the street by a police officer is a very visible form of this subjugation, but there's so many tiny forms of this subjugation. I left academia 2 years ago to work in criminal justice reform, and I work for the probation department now. And one of the patterns that we want to try to unravel that's so hard to do is that very early in the public education system, young Black boys who come from families of poverty or who might have slight learning disabilities or behavioral issues are labeled unteachable. And so then they're not taught, right? They're just disciplined. And they get further and further behind, and then they sort of start to be feared. There's like a transition, I don't know, at a certain age where they're obviously disruptive because they can't learn, because no one's trying to teach them and no one's addressing any learning disabilities or trauma in the home, or just even like nutrition, really basic, like, are you getting enough to eat? And then once they're labeled, a problem child or a child who's unteachable, then they sort of become, the label morphs into like dangerous or violent or criminal. And then the police get called every time there's a fight. And then that's the sort of, school to prison pipeline, right, where you see this school system totally fails our children.
Yeah, and I wonder, and it's interesting, and I think all three of us have a sort of a tie-in with this because, Norman, you've done a lot of work with Each One Reach One, bringing theater to the kids who are in the juvenile facility. And I've worked as a paralegal for the DA's office for 23 years. And so I see a lot of these cases, go across. I deal with white-collar crime, but right next to my unit used to be CARU, the Child Abduction Recovery Unit, but it dealt with domestic stuff. Like, let's say a family can't hang with, their child because their child is wilding out and they don't know what to do. And because the teachers are too afraid to teach a child. And I also believe, and Norman, I want to, throw this at you as well. Well, actually, the both of you, I really do believe, some cops believe, and I think some people believe, a Black man can take a beating. I just put my knee on George Floyd's neck. But, he's Black, he can handle it.
Right. He's an animal, so I can just restrain him the way I'd restrain an animal.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I think, are you surprised, I'll ask the both of you, of the outrage, not only there are protests happening all over the United States. Yep. And that didn't happen with Breonna Taylor, who was a Black woman who, because of a failed search warrant, was killed by cops. And it didn't happen with the Arbery. I thought that the Ahmaud Arbery case would be a thing that would strike a national thing. Why do you think it happened this time? Do you think it was just, the last straw, or what do you think? Yeah.
Plus the video. The
video,
video
that's right.
is so graphic.
Yeah, I think so.
There are a lot of videos, graphic videos. It's really interesting. If you look at history,
yes, there are.
Yeah, and it's it's like, I have to say that there are certain lines that I can't cross, and those videos are one of the lines, right? I can't watch people being brutalized by police. I have to manage my own trauma. I work in a field where there's a lot of vicarious trauma. I can't watch that. I can't watch children being hurt, Yeah.
Right.
Just knowing that it happens is enough for me. But to answer your question, it's really history. If you look at history, the inciting incident for like revolution and war and like some massive political event is always something really small. It's like almost that it builds up and it builds up and it builds up, and then someone says boo and it just blows up.
Right.
So I almost feel like what sets it off is sort of random. I mean, this was obviously an awful situation, but I feel like there's been so many, right? Like you're selling gum on the street, or, you know, like there's so many Black men that I've seen this happen to on videos, you know, in social media.
And women. I mean, Sandra Bland is back in the news.
Oh, tell me about that.
Just, you know, that this is bringing up again for those who are saying, well, you just have to give the system a chance to work things out. It's like, you know what, this woman got pulled over for a traffic stop and died. No, let's not just let the system work this out.
Yeah. And Naseem, what did you think about, it's funny, you know, listening to Trump, and, you know, once again, he put his foot in his mouth and didn't even want to address it yesterday when he had his, you know, full press conference. He wanted to talk about China and how they're at fault, or Hong Kong is at fault for COVID-19 when it happened in another region in China. So, you know, but he didn't want to address his snafu, you know, his statement. I forget what it was. If you're looting, you're shooting, which is based on a 1967 comment by a mayor who basically gave his police department the authority to shoot and kill.
Miami police chief.
Yeah, Miami police chief. But you and I, Naseem, we were in the Berkeley Rep. That's how you and I met, learning, you know, playwriting when Trump was elected. You know, we were looking at our phones and sort of, oh my God, he got elected. So
that was the worst class ever.
Yes. Did it shock you? And are you more optimistic now, 2020? What do you think?
No. Why should I be optimistic? I don't have any reason to be optimistic. No, I mean, I think that the system itself is broken. It's not about, you know, let the system run its course. The system is based on inequality. Capitalism is extremely flawed. People in this country are not really politically active in the sense of like, you know, as long as we can buy our consumer goods, as long as we have a job that we like and, you know, we're paying our mortgage, we can close our eyes to the experience of other people. And it is sort of the extreme of capitalism that does that. And I think that what's happening now with Trump, and I don't listen to him because I don't think he has anything worthwhile to say. So I don't know why he said what he said in whatever speech he gave, but I'm surprised he didn't say there were some fine people in the crowd, you know?
Right.
But I think what he's an example of is the sort of that like vulgar extreme of, if you take this road of capitalism and this road of sort of white supremacy to its extreme, you get someone like Trump with the followers that he has speaking to each other in a language that doesn't make sense. It's ahistorical. It doesn't acknowledge the other cultures of the world. It doesn't acknowledge the history. It's just sort of like making up facts and talking to each other in this like gibberish. And we're all watching it and we're totally shocked. And people like me who are scholars, who are involved in politics, are saying like, how come the smart people can't do anything about, like, where are all the smart people? Why are the stupid people like running things? And it's because that's the way the system is designed. It's the way the system here is designed. It's to prevent this sort of intellectual elite from taking power away from landowners, you know, slave owners. It is absolutely the way that it's supposed to work here. Yeah, so we have to ask ourselves, do we want it to continue to be built this way?
Right.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting that you brought up a good point about us devaluing intellectualism, the ability to think and to reason and to talk about these things. I remember reading about Adlai Stevenson when he ran against Eisenhower, and the biggest problem that people had was that, well, he's an egghead. And it's funny, the rise of Eisenhower, I mean, he was the guy who won the war, or, you know, he was the general of the army, but he had a problem, you know, dealing with the Republicans in the 50s. You know, there was Brown v. Board of Education, but he had to deal with sending troops to, you know, alleviate the friction between the Southerners and the Black folks who just wanted to vote, but also just dealing with the military-industrial complex, dealing with the folks like I remember Gary Powers, the U-2 spy plane or whatever.
Right.
But even Eisenhower himself had a problem controlling his own party, individuals doing things behind his back. And in his last State of the Union address, he talked about the danger of the military-industrial complex and individuals sort of taking over democracy. And I think that's really, really when it began. I mean, when we talk about what's happening with America, we can have the shootings and we can say, hey, we need to change things. Yesterday, I heard, Gavin Newsom talk about we need to change things, and the Minnesota mayor, talking about we need to change things. And you hear the speeches, but it's like, where is there going to be action?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. In any case, okay, so let's get into an origin story. So I believe you're Iranian. Is that right, Naseem?
Yes, I was born in Tehran, Iran in 1976.
Wow. How was life growing up there?
Well, it was violent and pretty awful right off the bat, because what we had was a similar situation of government oppression, state-sanctioned violence against people, and also this just very rapid modernization that happened in a Western model that clashed with the local culture. And the difference in Iran is that Iran has thousands of years of history, and it has a very cohesive, distinct culture. So it, people had a really clear identity of who they were. And then the king was kind of a puppet of America, and he came in and modernized, and it was very
this was the Shah, right? The
Shah, yeah.
Yeah.
He forcibly settled the sort of nomadic people, and the reforms that he made were really, traumatizing, and he was corrupt. He was, he had a secret police, and they were torturing people. But for, many, many different reasons over the course of the previous century, Iranians took to the streets, and protests just continued and continued. And it was uniquely a middle-class revolution in the sense of, like, everybody was involved: the merchant class, the middle class, intellectuals, communists, peasants. And when protests continue for long enough, it turns into a revolution. So I was born a couple of years before the revolution. And then in 1980, Iraq declared war on Iran, and then a war started. So then they were shelling the city. We had to, hide in our basement. And then in 1981, we were able to leave the country.
Wow, that's fantastic. I mean, I remember, I think you have to be of a particular age to even read the newspapers about the Shah of Iran and, this really a horrible picture that, that all Americans saw of this individual who was starting this revolution. And of course, the Iran hostage crisis during the Carter administration, 444 days. And I was really, I was a young kid, but I was of that age of just absorbing the news. And but
I was in the army, and I was terrified we were going to war.
Yeah,
I think Iranians now are terrified that America's going to. It's like this perpetual weird war with Iran. But the context for the hostage crisis, I think that maybe some of the information didn't get here, was that for many years the embassy, the American embassy in Tehran, was like this fortress, this massive installation that was full of intelligence officers from the United States, and it was known to be like a hub of the CIA. And so when the revolution happened, it was an obvious target of people saw the Shah as not of their own country, so they felt that they had this external leader, and it was basically a colonial experience. They wanted and so they saw that as like the palace of the king, right? The palace of the foreign dictators, and wanted to make a big, bold global statement. And also recall that the hostage takers were young men, mostly. They were like in their early 20s, late teens. These are people in a very idealistic phase of their lives, and kind of, like full of energy to make change, and maybe kind of impulsive, and not thinking about like global geopolitics and the impact of it and the potential consequences. It could have been much worse than what it was.
Yeah, Yeah, I mean the parallel. I mean, there's a parallel. I mean, young individuals who are going off to war right now, American soldiers, full of patriotism. I mean, that could easily, I could see the parallels between that. But how did your family make it? I mean, there are a lot of families, I'm sure, Iranian families that did not make it to America. But
No, I
how
mean
did your family
it's a
make it?
real sad story. So my family left after the war had started. It was about 1 year already of war, and that war lasted, I think, years. Like I think 8 years. I for some reason can't remember off the top of my head, but 1 million people died. One
Oh,
million Iranians. Yeah, I mean, it
Wow.
was a really horrible war. It was a war of attrition. So it was like a stalemate war, and Iraq used chemical weapons that were given to them by the Americans.
mm-hmm.
Ask Donald Rumsfeld. But that's part of what comes later is like we're convinced that Saddam Hussein has chemical weapons because we gave them to him.
Right.
But so they used chemical weapons. So many Iranians died. And the problem was that the Iranian military conscripted boys as young as 12. And I had an older brother. So I was 5 by the time we left, but my brother was 8. And my parents were terrified for him. Like, what if, we can't bribe our way out of this? So they wanted to flee, but we had waited too long to leave, so we couldn't take anything with us.
Mm-hmm.
And then my father got, arrested. So basically, a lot of horrible, scary events happened, and we managed to make it to Germany, but with nothing, with none of our possessions or money or anything. So we went from like my dad had built his dream home and he had made a business and he had been really successful to we're just scraping by and immigrants in a European country hoping that we can go back soon. Then after 4 years in Germany, we realized this is a permanent state. We're not going to ever be able to go back. And so then we immigrated to the United States.
Mm-hmm.
When did you make it to the United States? What year?
It was 1985, and we landed in Los Angeles, which was a huge culture shock because I was expecting like the land of ET, like suburbs and friendly neighbors. And LA was like this place where every kind of immigrant from everywhere in the world was desperately trying to make it, and they didn't have time for you. They weren't like waving to you on their way to work. And it had a very complicated race politics that we didn't understand because, we didn't have those race categories in Iran. We had different race categories.
Right.
And my parents were very involved in the Iranian community, and I went to public schools in LA. And I was there until I went through high school, and then I moved to the Bay Area.
Oh,
which
wow.
was a huge breath of fresh air.
Yeah, I think, well, I mean, there's so many transplants. I'm from the East Coast, and, Norman is from Indiana. So there are a lot of folks in the Bay Area. It's like, finally, I'm here.
Yeah.
But mostly for me, it's Southern Cal. I mean, Indiana is where I was born, but I grew up in Southern Cal.
Were you happy to leave?
Oh, I couldn't wait.
Me too.
I turned 18 and I went in the Army. And when I got back, I did a year or two of school, and then I got out of the Southern California, LA area. I was done. And I fully expected, I'm the oldest, I fully expected all my siblings, as soon as they got out of school, to follow. Nope. Everybody else stayed set until recently, like within the last decade, I guess. So it's been weird to watch. I don't know why anybody, my other experience of it was seeing everybody else thrive. So LA is a positive, nurturing place for some people. It just wasn't for me.
I feel the same way.
Yeah, I get the feeling when people arrive at LA, the land of Lala. Even Stevie Wonder wrote a song about it, where people come and they expect to, be on the top of the hill to receive everything that they saw in the movies and everything they'll be discovered or whatever. And usually the reality is completely different. I was going to ask about were you involved in the arts at all when you were a child? I mean, did you, maybe not as a child, but even as a teenager or when you were in school? Like, did you do plays and anything like that?
Absolutely. I was a dancer, and I joined a children's dance company, and I loved to perform, and I did theater in high school and junior high. So I was a theater kid. And the problem with LA, if you're interested in those the performing arts, is that it's too big. It's, it's like an ocean that you find yourself in, and it's kind of like broken dreams everywhere. And then you see the industry, and you go to school with kids, with parents in the industry, and it seems very much like it's who and it's closed. Where in the Bay Area, it's very easy it's a small, it's a smaller pond to enter into the industry. So LA for me made having a life of art seem unreachable. Even though, you know, that's where everybody goes to be an actor, to be a performer, or writer of some kind. That's where you go because that's where the opportunities are. But it didn't seem possible there. And not until later in my life, you know, it was a dream I had to let go of when I became an adult, because it seemed I saw so many people around me who had moved to LA to have a career, who had ended up just with no access, or were teaching acting classes but didn't have any work of their own. And it wasn't until much later in my life, you know, like a midlife crisis phase, where I just said, you know, now's it, I'm going to do it. And it seemed here that so many more things were possible. And also maybe being older and not having that adolescent need to like be at the top or be successful, but I could define success in my own way, and that made it so much easier. So if I was going to mentor a young person now, I would say define success in small steps for yourself. Don't look to everyone else's definition of success, because it feels really demoralizing and unattainable. And also, when I was growing up, I didn't see my face anywhere, not in plays, not on television, not in print. You know, like Middle Eastern women or men were just like invisible. We didn't exist. Right. And now you kind of see these like bit smaller characters in television shows coming up, and now there's opportunities for actors from a Middle Eastern background.
No, that's fantastic. I wanted to get into your writing. I mean, you know, if it weren't for COVID-19, and let's not forget about that with everything else going on, you would have had a play up at the Exit Theater. It's being pushed back a year, which is good. I'm glad they're still going to do it. But I wanted to, can you talk a little bit about what that production was and how you sort of got into writing?
Yes, absolutely. Well, I'll first tell you about this play this summer. It's because I'm really proud of it, and it's a really exciting project. It's called A People's History of the 20th Century, and it is the brainchild of Stuart Bazell, who is an amazing playwright and performer and director in the Bay Area. And he has actually been an amazing person in my career, for my profession, in terms of encouraging me and exposing me to opportunities. He runs the San Francisco Olympians Festival, and he, I think, was artistic director at Custom Made Theater for a period. He's just someone who really believes in giving younger playwrights or new playwrights opportunities, and doesn't require like a long resume of experience in theater. You know, even though he and his inner circle are probably all theater nerds and can, you know, have all this information at their disposal, he doesn't see that as like a necessary background to have an entry into the theater arts. So he put this play together, and he basically recruited 10 playwrights, well, 9 including him. And I assigned each of us a decade of the 20th century, and we got to write a short 10-minute play. And the plays, we worked together. We met throughout all of last year and put the 10 plays together into one long play about the 20th century. It was so fun. It was really fun. The plays are different, very different, and some are more personal and quiet. Some are more sort of like epic and deal with bigger themes. And it was really fun. So it was going to run for about 3 weeks this summer at the Exit Theater. And then when the pandemic happened, the Exit Theater administration decided that they were going to just move all of their schedule for the summer, you know, postpone it for a whole year and put all of those plays on the following summer. But to answer your question about how I got into playwriting, so I started to write seriously in 2016. I had actually been writing a novel prior to that, but I started writing a play in 2016, and I started taking classes at Berkeley Rep, and that was a really amazing place for me. I don't know if it was the same for you, but I met a lot of great people in those early classes. I think my first class was an acting class with an acting coach called James Wagner. He's based in LA, and he's an amazing coach, an acting coach, and an amazing actor, and he has a following. I took his first class, and I learned very quickly that all the people in his class took his class regularly, because he would come up from LA like sort of twice a year. And the people I met in that class were amazing, and they're doing really amazing things now. I know you did an interview with Joyce Hu. She was in that class.
Joyce Hu, yeah, right on.
Yeah. And then Kate Cryan, she ended up founding a theater called the 51st Theater Company. And I don't, bless you.
Oh.
And then Marika Kuzma, I don't know if you know her. She was in that class with me. She had been the choral director, the head of, the conductor. I think it's called a conductor for a choir, but anyway, at UC Berkeley, and she had retired, and she sort of decided to try acting. And like very quickly, she was doing big plays. She actually was an understudy at a play at the Berkeley Rep, and then ended up being able to be in one of the performances. And she moved to the East Coast recently to keep pursuing her career, but she had a one-woman show called Unsung Stories that's autobiographical, that was at it was at Counterpulse, and I saw it. It was one of the best pieces of theater I've ever seen. She wove through music, like she sang all different types of music through this one piece, and I loved it. Who else there was Deborah Cortez, she's so prolific.
Yeah, formerly Deborah Murphy. She's working with Generation Theater with David Belair.
She's like with everybody. I've never met anyone that prolific. I mean, she's in like 2 plays a month, I feel. I don't know right now, but she was there. And then a bunch of other really interesting people. And actually, Deborah was the one who told me so I was also in playwriting classes. I took a playwriting class with a theater director called Edward Morgan at Berkeley Rep, and he was an amazing coach as well. I took a class called Turning Shakespeare on Her Head, and it was all about, sort of playing roles outside of your, like, what you look like, basically, your gender, your race, or whatever, your age. And so it was actually Deborah Cortez who told me about this program that Custom Made Theater did, called their New Works program. So I applied. I had written a full-length play that I think you're familiar with, called Seek the Water, and I submitted my play to that program, and it got accepted. So that was, I think, the 2018 New Works program, and the first reading that I had for this play at Custom Made Theater was directed by Callum Thibodeau, and then we had another reading that was directed by Stuart Bazel, and so that's how Stuart and I got to know each other well. And then in the meantime, I did the Atlas program through Theater Bay Area, which I don't know if you know about it. It's this.
Oh, say something about it though, because it's worth. It's a great.
Yeah, theater. It's a great program. Yeah, Theater Bay Area runs a program for theater professionals that helps them sort of get the skills they need to take their career to the next level. And it's mostly like professional skills, not creative skills. It's called, gosh, I can't remember what the acronym stands for.
What Atlas stands for?
Yeah, what does it stand for? Anyway.
Yeah.
So the person that runs it is Dale Albright, and he's amazing. He's another one of these people that really, really supports local theater makers and helps kind of launch careers. So the program is for actor. They have three kind of paths: actors, directors, and playwrights. So I did the playwright path, and it was a great experience. So you don't have to be, so you can be anywhere in your career. It's just helping you get to the next stage. So you could be really, really successful local playwright, but you want to become a national playwright. Or you could be someone who has one play like me and just want to sort of enter the theater world with your one play.
Right.
Yeah.
Atlas, Advanced Training Leading Artists to Success.
There you go.
Right on. And we've had Dale Albright on. He was a fantastic guest, and also I was on stage with him. We acted. It was Skin of Our Teeth at the Douglas Morrison Theater. So what a small world. I did have a question for you, Naseem. How did you get into writing? Because writing, I mean, that's a different hat to put on. And also, I wanted to talk about what you learned at Oxford, because it sounds like you have a drive for humanity and what's happening as far as your political studies. Like I'm thinking one led to another.
Yeah, I mean, I learned a lot at Oxford. There was part of my learning was, the coursework, being around these amazing people in the departments and the incredible minds that are there and the environment that they create for learning. But then the other part of it was being in a medieval city, a very elite institution in a class-based society. The United Kingdom is different than the United States in terms of race. They're very class-based. And then also seeing Americans, the Americans who come to Oxford on Rhodes Scholarships and Marshall Scholarships are basically American elites too. So you kind of see your own country from afar in a very interesting way. So you could see the future leaders of the United States, the future congressmen and women, and you kind of saw the way that the world is ordered in this kind of hierarchy. So that I learned a lot being in Oxford and living in this other culture and looking back at America. And I decided, I went there because I wanted to study forced migration. I had been a person who had been displaced. My family had migrated across the world and we were immigrants in America and kind of didn't totally fit. There wasn't a place for us, for our culture. And I wanted to, and it was right after September 11th, and I was in San Francisco when it happened. And I remember thinking, I wanted to go out and see the world, because here it's like, San Francisco is like this big wedding cake, beautiful city. And it seemed like this idealistic, like perfect place to live that didn't have you couldn't see the struggles that people have in the world. I mean, I don't necessarily think that now, but my 25-year-old self thought that then, that I needed to go out into the world to see the reality of people's struggles. So I wanted to study forced migration. And I got into a program for international development. And very quickly, I decided that I wanted to spend my time doing research and studying Africa. And Oxford is a really good place to study Africa because it has like hundreds of years of history of scholarship in Africa for horrible reasons because of the colonial enterprise. But as a result, it has a huge African studies department with some of the best scholars in the world there. And you can go to Africa very easily. Whereas if you were in a graduate program in California, to get all of the permissions and approvals to go that far away and get the funding, it's just a lot harder. And also, like at UC Berkeley, you probably have like one person in the political science department who studies Africa, maybe two. So you don't really have that really rich dialogue. I mean, I had colleagues, young people in graduate programs. One colleague, Phil Clark, he was going into refugee camps in Eastern Congo where the Rwandan genocidaires had fled.
Wow, yeah.
And talking to them. And it's crazy, you think, how dangerous is that? But then at the same time, you're like, we should know what they have to say. That's what a scholar does. You're not going to judge your informants. You're going to go and say, like, tell me why you did this thing. Like, what motivated you? Like, what were your reasons? And so he did this amazing research. And then there's also this woman, Marika Skomaris, I don't know how to say her name, but she went into the bush and met with Joseph Kony of the Lord's Resistance Army and interviewed him. Yeah, so you can imagine I'm around these amazing people that are fearless, doing great things. So a lot of them had been former journalists who had like decided to go and do a PhD and become scholars and academics. So it was an amazing experience. I went to Sudan and I had, between 2006 and 2008, I had an opportunity to really be on the ground when that country was going through this massive transformation. I spent a lot of time interviewing Sudan People's Liberation Army commanders. I had a research assistant. We just would go on the back of his motorcycles to the commanders' homes and knock on the door until they would talk to me, because there was like no cell phone network, there were no roads, it was just completely like starting a new country and building a government from scratch. So it was a really exciting, interesting time.
Yeah. So does your writings reflect, when we were together at the Berkeley Rep, studying playwriting, you were writing a lot about your experience in Iran. And I imagine, what you saw in the Sudan. I imagine your writing as of right now reflects that. Talk about the social element to writing, because, and I mention that because of what's happening right now, whether it be COVID-19, dealing with Trump, or dealing with, Black violence by the hands of the police or the barbecue Beckys of the world. I think there's a role in art, in writing, in theater productions that sort of that speaks truth to power.
It's a
Absolutely.
challenging subject though, because there's so many people who want theater to be that escape. I want
Yeah.
to get away from reality. I don't want to deal with this. So it's always interesting to see how those two things intersect.
Yeah. What do
Well,
you think, Nassim?
so I think you have to be really careful because an audience is smart and savvy and they know when you're trying to teach them something and they will reject that. The way that I approached it more was I've had these really unique experiences, and I wanted to create a window into these moments in time that I lived in, or that, were fictional, but like reflected something in a moment in time that I had access to, for people who may not have ever been to Sudan or who may not have ever been to Iran. And I think if you try to, the approach I take is to say, what is my perspective? What's unique about my perspective or my experiences that might be interesting to somebody else? And then if you present that in a really authentic way, that speaking truth to power, that messaging comes through subtly, and audiences take it and make with it what they will, right? So they like glean a lesson from it on their own. So if you tell a story of, a person who had been subjugated and had responded through violence, and you tell it in a really personal way with history and context and anguish, I think you reveal a lot about the reasons for violence and the impetus to violence and the role that violence plays in political change or in society, and rather than if you like make a message play. I think you have to be like really brilliant to have a message you want to get across and sit down and like design a play around that without alienating audiences.
Exactly, without preaching to them. Yeah, it's a struggle that I deal with a great deal, because you have an idea, you have a message you want to get across, but you don't want to preach to them. I remember, I'm hoping that I'm not confusing your play, because there was another writer named Dipti, and I think the two of you are writing sort of the same. There was a plot in, I think it's your play, let me know if it wasn't, where it really dealt with I think there were two women, but they were two sort of different cultures, but they were sort of connected together. I think one of the cool things about your writing is that you don't necessarily talk about, let's say, what's happening, but really just about two individuals or an individual dealing with, let's say, I don't know, food, or let's say an item of clothing. And that can be sort of the gateway towards a bigger message. Am I confusing?
Yeah, food is a great topic to like use to discuss culture. I think food is a brilliant, it's like food and hair and fashion and those kinds of things are great sort of symbols of cultural difference and class difference and great ways of having conversations about those topics. But my play, I think the play that I was writing when we were in a class together is called Seek the Water, and it takes place in an Iranian jail. And it is a group of women who have been arrested after going to a party. And one of them is Iranian American, sort of is back to Iran for a visit, and the others have never left Iran since the revolution. And it's these two sort of versions of who I could have been.
I'm remembering now. Yes.
Yeah. And of course there's a clash, because Iranian culture has so many rules. There's this sense of like, we're here and we're left behind, and we live in this society with, that's kind of oppressive and socially, limits us a lot. And you guys are in America and you have all these fancy things and you have such an easy life. Then there's this reverse feeling of, I don't belong anywhere. I don't have those, you're so rich in your culture and your belonging and your community, and you never had to start over anywhere, and you haven't had any hardship. You live in Iran and you have dictators, but you've never had to make a whole new set of friends or start a new career. Like, you just didn't have that trauma. So it's almost like a competition of like, I lived through war, my trauma is more important than yours. And it happens through this 3 days in this prison. through
Yeah,
these conversations between these young girls.
yeah, I remember the connection. Yeah, it was very strong, and obviously, I think you said that Custom Made it got a reading at Custom Made Theater. Was that
yeah,
right?
we got 2 readings, and then the subsequent year, it was in the New Works program, was Custom Made, and then the subsequent year it had a reading at the Playwright Center of San Francisco too, and that was a really good experience. I think I was able to develop it over the course of those 3 readings to get it to this place that I'm happy with. I learned a lot. It was my first play, so I learned all the things not to do, like don't write a play with 13 characters, you know, because it's very hard to produce. But I don't think I could have written it with fewer characters, because I needed to have so many perspectives, because the jail guards are also really involved in the play, and they come from like poor families in Iran, and you see the class differences portrayed through them.
One of the cool things about your play is that, you know, it's both external and internal conflict. You have an external conflict of 2 individuals dealing with a society or regime or a government that they're fighting against, which is the obvious thing. But then you have the internal, where you have 2 individuals from the same culture, but one is, let's say, I mean, it's almost like a class. You know, one has sort of maybe assimilated into, you know, the upper rich class, and then you have another one who is more grounded, and these 2 are fighting against one another, but both are still dealing with the system. And it's very parallel to, you know, what African Americans deal with. You know, let's say someone has made it big, a big rap star, and there's another one still on the streets or whatever. I mean, we dealt with an informant in Paris. You know, you have these individuals who are battling, let's say, an oppressive American government, even though they're in Paris, but they're also fighting with one another. So I think, you know, those are wonderful little parallels, and you have that in your play as well.
Yeah, thank you. I absolutely think that in order to have a system of oppression, you need to have collaborators from the cohort of people that you're oppressing. That was true in slavery, that was true in colonialism, it's true in the criminal justice system. And by collaborators, I don't mean that they're sharing your agenda. It's just that you kind of coerce people to work in the prison system. You know, there's a lot of Black and brown people working in corrections, in law enforcement. And it is, I don't know that it's a conscious strategy, but it is a really effective way of keeping things the way they are. You know, if you go down to any prison and you look at the sort of demographic of the people who work in the prison, you see that oftentimes those jobs are opportunities for people of color, right? Like they are ways of getting, bringing yourself out of whatever situation you're in. It's a good job. It pays well. There's a pension.
But you're part of the system. You're part of the very system.
You become part of the system. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
It's interesting, as you mentioned that, I think about Booker T. Washington, who at the turn of the century had created these historical Black colleges like Tuskegee Institute and a bunch of others. Mm-hmm. But those institutions were only made to educate the African American to be better workers for the white folks, the Southern white folks, to be better farmers. I don't think any of those colleges, created lawyers or individuals to fight the system. And he had a big argument with W.E.B. Du Bois, who said, hey, we cannot assimilate at all. And I think that, it's an interesting subject matter as far as, we have a system. I mean, we have to comply to a particular system. We don't have to comply all the way. Like I have to, if a cop stops me and says, hey, I need to see your ID, I can fight that. Or I could say, hey, I'm going to show you my ID, but I want to know why you're stopping me. So there are always degrees to how far do you comply with the system before you cross that line and you've totally assimilated or you've totally become a part of the system, and how much do you resist? Like I've heard a lot of folks talk about the people who are protesting, and a lot of the people in power say, well, it's okay to protest, but you can't burn down Rite Aid. You can't burn down Target, Be a good protester than a bad protester.
Got burned down for what reason? What was this about again? Oh yeah, somebody got killed.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
I mean, what I would say to that is this country was founded on civil disobedience and riots and destruction of property.
Yep.
And that democracy globally was founded on moving away from the status quo through violence, through civil disobedience, through protest, through all of what we're seeing here. You know, it's a total hypocrisy to say that it's counter to democracy. Right. It hurts capitalism, right? But, you know, Target, the protesters in Oakland that, you know, were out in the streets last night, they targeted corporations, right? Like Walgreens, Target, Chase Bank. Those entities are insured, first of all.
So
but also, there were some white people who, I mean, I don't know, I think when we analyze this and we come back and look at it, we'll see that it's actually a lot more cynical than it looks. Like, I absolutely don't criticize people for going out into the streets and rioting. And, you know, rioting is very much a part of human history when you have no other tools at your disposal, when the system, when you can't work within the system. Right. It's been hundreds of years, the system isn't helping us to work with it. But I think we're going to discover that there were actually some right-wing white supremacists involved in some of the violence, some of the destruction of property.
And undercover police.
Yeah, I saw there was one article where there was a police who had a mask on and his ex-wife outed him. I thought that was funny.
Well, his police department denies that he was in any way involved in it. Curiously, they did not say he was here at this time or he was working. They didn't give him an alibi. They just said, "Oh no, that wasn't our guy." Like,
was he the guy with the hammer and the umbrella?
He was a guy.
He had like a blue mask on. He had a mask and
he had a big mask on and his head covered. And he goes up and you see him like he was the first one to break into something.
Well, Rebecca Solnit just posted on Facebook today a video of a white man wearing all black with a gas mask and for some reason carrying an umbrella over his head with a hammer, just breaking the windows of stores. And a group of
Minneapolis.
See, that's the thing. It may not have been Oakland. I don't know why I thought it was Oakland because she's local, but it may have been Minneapolis. But it doesn't matter, right? Like,
it doesn't.
Throughout the country, this is happening. And a group of black teenagers follow him. They're videotaping him and they're following him. Right. And I don't know what happens, but over the course of this, they discover he's a police officer. He's like off duty. Yeah. And it's crazy that, he's just going around damaging property so that So the next day they can be like, oh, look, all this property was damaged.
Right. And focus on that rather than the issue at hand. Yeah.
But Naseem, the question that I had for you, I guess an overall question, do you see your writing as being a social message? I mean, is there a message in everything that you write, or you just want to write to just, I don't know, just be artistic? It sounds like you have a purpose in your writing.
I do have a purpose in my writing. I mean, I think that I don't think that, so the play about Iran, Seek the Water, that had a lot to do with the misunderstanding that Americans have about Iran. I mean, I wanted to show the real lives of Iranians and the experiences of the revolution that Iranians went through, because in America, we're not really taught in schools about other countries or like other cultures. And I think as a result, Americans are very fearful of like traveling abroad and of, like an American who hasn't been exposed, might be afraid of going to the Middle East, like, oh, the Middle East is this dangerous place, but it's a beautiful place. Some people are afraid of going to Africa. Like, it's like seen as this place at war. But I mean, there's like doctors and lawyers and like, people having parties, and there's like a Burning Man fest. Like, there's life, and life goes on everywhere, and there's pockets of violence, but it's a beautiful continent that is very similar to our own culture, but the Middle East as well. And I think that I see my role as somebody who has this unique experience of having lived through very many different cultures. And, I'm not white, I'm not black, I'm not really any category you can tick in a box in the United States. Yeah, but it's like, there's like Hispanic, sometimes South Asian, sometimes some, Polynesian islands, but like there's no Iranian or Middle Eastern. It's an identity that we don't really know what to make of right now. But yeah, immigrant. I'm an immigrant. And I thought that there was still something in my experience that I hadn't seen, in television or in plays and movies, and that is what I wanted to speak to. But it wasn't so much that I had an agenda. It was more just like, well, if I'm going to write, what do I have to say that's unique to me and hasn't been heard
Right.
And then also, I think we all have these stories inside of us that we want to tell, and we're not sure, is it a play? Is it a short story? Is it a film? But we want to get it out, and they stem from some experiences we've had or people we've met. And I guess all of my plays do tend to be sort of social messagey. Stuart Bauzal runs this, the San Francisco Olympians Festival, and I had a play in it last year. I collaborated with Edward Morgan, actually, on this play called Written in the Stars, and it's about this artificial intelligence breeding program. So these two AI scientists have this secret breeding program where they design humanoid artificial intelligence beings who are just, you know, indistinguishable from human beings, but they can actually reproduce through their, like, or they have reproductive organs. And then he would, you know, breed them to each other, and then they would give birth to this other species. And so we wrote this play together, and it was read in the Olympians Festival last fall. And that kind of, I guess, is an example of something that's not so social messagey, although you could read it that way too. I'm not planning on just writing about being an immigrant and being from the Middle East.
Mm-hmm. No, but I mean, it sounds like it's the writing, your writing. It's an outlet for you, and it's also a way to express, you know, your views of what's happening out in the world, whether it be, you know, artificial intelligence or whatever. But no, I think it's just fantastic. Where do you see yourself? This is my last question because I know, Norman, you have to get out of here. It's 12:15.
Yeah, we're good for the moment. Yes.
Cool. Where do you see yourself in the future, Naseem? What do you want to do? Do you want to get into writing for film and television? Are you happy with where you are?
I would love to write for television.
Yeah.
I'll tell you about my passion project. I have been writing a fantasy novel for quite some years. It's called Rebellion. It's a trilogy, the River Wars trilogy. It's actually up on Wattpad, which is this sharing, like this really amazing website and community. I think it has 80 million users.
Wattpad, is it WHATPAD?
No, it's WATTPAD.
Wattpad. Got it. Okay, cool. We'll
so if you want to read my story, the first book of my trilogy, it's up on Wattpad, and it is called Rebellion, River Wars Trilogy, because there's lots of books that are called Rebellion. I probably should rename it, but I've been writing it for years, and it's very plot driven, and it's like world building. It's a high fantasy novel, but it's based on, so it's about this secret guild of orphan bodyguards in this, and the world is just cities that are like loosely affiliated with one another, and in between them is like anarchic, ungoverned territories. And so I've been writing that for ages, and I actually did take a year off between when I left academia. I was teaching at Cal State University, Monterey Bay, and then I left and I took a year off, and I taught myself how to do screenwriting using Script Notes, which is a podcast run by two LA screenwriters. It's incredible. If you want to learn screenwriting, I highly recommend it, Script Notes. And I think I listened to 100 hours of Script Notes, and I felt like I got an MFA in screenwriting. And I wrote a television pilot for my novel that I was working on, and I scripted the narrative arc for the whole first season and did summaries of the second season and the third season to correspond to the second and third books. And then I set it aside because what do you do with a screenplay? Who knows, right? And then I went back to the book, and I finished the first draft of the book. It's up on Wattpad. I'm gonna do one more round of edits and then start pitching it. And so my dream is to get the book published. Well, first, to make it really good, because I've spent enough time on it now that I want it to actually be really good. To get it published, and then yes, to get sell it to a movie studio or a television studio, and then be part of writing the screenplay. That would be my dream come true. So
right on. The best of luck. I mean, you've already done the work, and you already have. I mean, I'm very impressed because all of us who were at the Berkeley Rep studying, I had wondered, okay, where are we going and all this stuff. And then I hear your name, and I'm like, oh wow, you have a play going on at the Exit Theater, and so you've actually found a niche. You didn't just write a play, but you're actually marketing it, and you're actually getting known. So that's a fantastic thing. So you've already done a fantastic work. Norman, shout outs, birthdays.
Yay! Yes, I'm ready. Birthdays.
Go for it.
Somewhere in here.
Yeah, I'm not.
There we are. Oh yeah, yeah. I'm loving this list. So today is Blair Zarubik, Bay Area. Well, he's Canadian, so he's. But at one point he was in the Bay Area, and we actually met doing. We were both understudying for Love's Labor's Lost with the SF Shakes Festival many years ago. So when I got to work with him again last year, it had been like over 20 years, something like that. That's how long I've known Blair. Anyway, his birthday is today. Andrea J. Love and was somebody I just met last summer. She was in As You Like It. She played Phoebe. We ended up having two Phoebe because she got another show up in Seattle and had to leave before the end of the summer. And when I started learning acting, you know, you do all these touchy-feely classes about how much you care about people and you're not competitive. And I see those actors who are competitive, and I've always thought they were kind of jerks. Last summer, I found myself being one of those actors because Andrea was so amazing. She sang this song that was beautiful. Her comic timing was amazing, so precise. And I had a scene right afterwards, and I'm like, my scene is a goofy clown scene. Oh my, I gotta compete. I gotta beat this. So whatever her applause is, I gotta come out and I gotta try and top it. It was horrible, but I give her credit for that. I wouldn't have thought that otherwise. And yeah, she's an amazing talent. She writes, she plays music. She's an amazing performer. She's beautiful, and she bounces up and down. She was in Sacramento, I think, as we were doing our show, and then all the way up to Seattle. She's working. Brian Lohman's birthday is coming up this week. I know him as an improviser, and I know he's still part of that community. Catherine Dickinson is somebody I went to high school with, and we did theater together. I don't know if she stayed in. I don't think so. And I'm going to skip names that I think you might cover. But there's another he was a young man when I met him, Yoma Sains. I'm probably mangling his name. But an intense Filipino actor, really amazing. Haley Sacomano is an actress I met when I got to do God of Carnage at the Shelton Theater, which was a weird experience, a lot of fun. It's such an intense play, and she was the other wife. She played Annette, who had to do, if you know the play, one of the most famous things in the play is that Annette at one point vomits on stage all over a coffee table. There is no way to hide that or get around it. You have to come up with a way to do that.
Ew.
I won't give up how we did it, but we did it. It was brilliant. And yeah, and Haley had to figure that out. And what was funny is, you know, you're an actor, so you try to get in the space for it. And it's like, look, you really can't get truly, honestly sick on stage. We got to do this. This is like stage combat to the nth degree. This has to be precise.
We got to bring in Maya Herbsman for that.
We should have that production could have used that.
Yeah.
An actor I've only met once, and it's weird because you work in the Bay Area and you think it's a small community and you see people, but his name is David Arrow, and we did Jeannie Baroga's play, Buffaloed. And he played the captain, and he was just amazing. And I'm like, how come I don't know about you? Well, within a month or two after we finished the show, he's across the country doing some other show, and then he's down in Atlanta doing another show. He's a Bay Area guy, but he is working all over the country, and that was wonderful for me to see. Nice to know people have their careers at that level. Barry Lank is another guy I went to high school with, and we did theater in high school. He has gone on to become a comedian. If you've ever heard of Air America, it was a radio station at one point across America. And he was one of the writers on there, and I think actually even had a little show. Kirk Livingston is another improviser that I know. Holly Fraser, I know I've met through theater, but I know her as a patron. So if she hears this, I apologize if there's a more direct connection, but you know, our audiences are important, and she's not just an audience. She's a very big supporter of Bay Area theater. And then a couple more. Elizabeth Craven is, again, you think you know people, but I did a show up in the North Bay, and I met this whole community, amazingly talented community, and Elizabeth Craven was up there, and she's a director, really powerful person. And the last time I think I directly connected with her, she was working with a company called Porchlight Theater, and they would do they were doing Chekhov and these sorts of, they were like following the Shakespeare model of doing plays outdoors. They were doing it at the Garden Center in Ross, and they had a few seasons of doing these, and I got to the point where I was so thrilled to go out there. It's not easy to get to, but the talent they would bring out was so amazing.
The
The way
Ross
they
Valley
brought the
Players,
place
yeah,
to life
yeah.
was so amazing. So, and she was directing for them. So Elizabeth Craven. And then the last one I have, Michael Scott Moore, and I actually meant to look it up while we were talking. Michael Scott Moore I met when he was, I believe it was it was either the East Bay Express or the SF Weekly. He was their theater critic for many years. And that was how I met him. He went on to write a novel, and then he got held hostage, and I think it was Afghanistan. He was there for like a couple of years before the State Department finally worked it out and got him back home. And I always thought that was such an intense experience for somebody who I just thought of as some guy who just goes to theater.
Wow, powerful.
But yeah, those are the birthday kids I got for this week. Who have you got?
I have 2 days ago, Soyla Hughes. She had her birthday on May the 28th. And I worked with Soyla. I was a stage manager for Bat Boy the Musical at the Ray of Light Theater. And she's an amazing singer and actress. Also, 2 days ago, Adiola Roll. My last production at EastEnders Repertory Company, the company that I was with for a while, she was a actress, and we did Pride Open together. She's a fantastic actress, model, and I think she sings too.
Yeah.
2 days ago, Werner von Gogh. He is a Philippine actor and a set builder for Bindlestiff Studios, and so I wanted to give a shout out to him.
And that's an amazing name for a Filipino.
It is. He's fantastic. Also 2 days ago, Rachel Bowman. She was in I wrote a little mini musical, Nia, the musical.
Yeah, I remember.
And she was in that. She was the mom. And also she and I were on stage. This is the Play Cafe. They have a musical cafe. And we were on stage. There was a short play called The Chain. I remember it, The Chain. And she and I were husband and wife. You talked about the late Stephen Randolph. We talked about him last week. And the only other person tomorrow, because 31 on the 1st, Monday the 1st, that would be Max Chang. And Max Chang was our assistant stage manager when we did Foreman in Paris. And
an amazing waiter.
Yes, an amazing waiter, and he has slimmed down. He's been working out, and he seems to be very, very happy. And I saw a posting on Plethos. They were talking about the events that have been going on, and so they had a little caption of I guess a snapshot, a picture of the Foreman in Paris, basically saying your words could start a revolution, basically giving solidarity to the folks who are protesting and and are sharing their emotions about what's been going on. So I wanted to give a shout out to Plethos. And they're having their last, I believe tonight, they're having their last virtual karaoke open mic. And so I'll put a link to that as well. And the one other thing that I want to promote, tomorrow will be the reading of my play on Zoom, Judicial Process. And that'll be, that's presented by Play by Play. Judith Offer, she runs the playwriting symposium. I don't know what they call it.
I'm not sure what they call it, but yeah, it's for writers to get a chance to hear their work out loud as like a first.
Exactly, and she does that at the Brooklyn Preserve. Because of COVID-19, it's being done virtually, and I'm very excited. It's an adaptation of Bertolt Brecht's Fear and Misery in the Third Reich. Bertolt Brecht, he basically wrote 27 one-act pieces. One of them was called Judicial Process, and I'm doing an adaptation on it, basically talking about how Trump is handling the illegal immigration and ICE and its effect on Latino Americans. And so it's not just me, but also there are a couple of other writers who are involved with it, and we're working with Town Hall Theater, and this will be my first time hearing it. It'll be a stage reading. Pete Fitzsimmons is in it. Eiko Yamamoto is in it. And Danny Martin, we've had him on.
Right.
And so that'll be tomorrow, 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on Zoom. And if
Ah,
if you're interested in clicking onto it, send me a message and I'll send you the Zoom link. That's it, Naseem.
wait, no, that's not it. I
I'm
got
sorry
some.
about that. Yeah, go
And
for it.
Naseem, if you have any shout outs you want to share, feel free to. I also, so we're head to head tomorrow because I've got my 3 o'clock, the Three Sisters, and it's going to be on It is posted on Facebook, so you can see it there, and it'll be a Facebook Live event at 3 o'clock. A new adaptation of the Three Sisters, and I'll be performing in that. And then, oh, what did I do with the other one? And then coming up is Playground.
That's right. They're sharing their anniversary. I saw them in the newspaper.
Or Playground?
I believe
Yeah,
so.
it's the
Yeah.
25th anniversary. They always do a thing that they call Best of Playground, and we're in that festival now, a whole festival. So right now is a play. I think I just posted it. I don't have the
Yeah.
title of it up. But there's Disbelief. That's the title of it. What I wanted to remember is more than the title. The playwright is a local playwright, or somebody who started off as a local playwright and is now a nationally known playwright. So yay. And then I will have a piece that I'll talk about more in the future that I'm directing as part of the Best of Playground is 6 short pieces from the last season. The best pieces that were voted the best each. They do once a month. We do a series of short pieces. Each show, there is one show that gets nominated as the best. And then they pull from that for this best of. So I've got a piece in that coming up, and I'll
Right
say more
on.
about it in the future.
And I wanted to give a shout out to Ruben Grijalva, who just had a baby. Looks like a baby boy. I'm not sure, but
Baby boy and just got married. They got married like maybe 3 weeks before the baby.
yeah, no, so fantastic. So I've known Ruben for a while. I think since 2006, and his current wife was his girlfriend at the time when it was a piece called Shadow Ball, and basically about a Negro League baseball player. And so the girlfriend and Ruben, they've been together for a long time. So congratulations to Ruben and for your baby and for your marriage and for the success of Playground, because Ruben has been behind the success of Playground in its 25th anniversary. So shout outs to Ruben and to Playground. So so 3 o'clock, was it the Three Sisters? Is that the adaptation?
Three Sisters, 3 o'clock.
Three Sisters, 3 o'clock.
Look it up on Facebook.
Exactly, and we'll post it as well. And then 2 hours later will be judicial process. Naseem, did you want to shout out anything, or did you want to promote anything?
I don't have anything. I didn't prepare anything, but I think I have tried to promote as many great local playwrights as I could think of off the top of my head.
Well, folks should check out Naseem's writings. We'll post I forget the website. You'll text it to me where people can read your reading.
The piece you were talking about. Yes, your book.
Yes, I will give you all the information for that. In fact, that will be good if I can send you links to upcoming shows.
Yes.
That hopefully next November, I've got a play coming out in next November's Olympians Festival, which is held every year. It's 10 years now that it's being held every year in the custom made theater and the exit theater.
Right.
And it is all new plays. So all new plays are being read. And I'm doing a play this year. It's the theme is folklore, folk tales. And so I'm doing a piece based on Scheherazade, who is the character in Arabian Nights. So that'll be in November. Mark your calendars. I'll send a link. Hopefully we'll be able to do it in person by then.
Yay.
That'll be nice.
Yep, fingers crossed.
Exactly.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah. And Naseem, you should think about submitting stuff to Playground, because they're always selecting new pieces, and that'll be a nice little venue for you. And Norman, you should let me know when they're accepting new plays, because I've got to. I want to submit some plays of mine.
Okay. I'll yes.
Okay. Naseem, did you have a good time?
This has been really fun. Thanks for having me on the show, you guys. It's been really, really great, really fun. And it's so nice to connect in the middle of this whole pandemic.
Right.
Exactly. No, it's great. It's great to see you again, Naseem. And
so good to see you.
Yeah. For those folks, you're watching it already, but I'll be posting this on YouTube. And the audio part of it will be on any podcast that you listen to, any podcast app that you listen to, whether it be the Apple Podcast app, or if you're on Android, you can listen to it on the SoundCloud app, or just go on soundcloud.com. The Yay was created by theater people for theater people. If you have a show you want to advertise, or if you just want to advertise yourself, let us know. Hit us up on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. I'm at Red Space Clay.
And I'm at Hoosier Hoosier.
Naseem, do you have an account on Twitter or Snapchat?
Website?
I have an account, my first name, my last name, on Instagram that I use for theater. And then I also have an account on Twitter that I just started using. I've just discovered the world of Twitter, and that is Naseem Tweeted.
Right on. So folks are looking for a budding playwright or even an actress. Have you ever been on stage? Do you want to be on stage?
Yeah, you asked that question. I absolutely have. I was in Bridget Dutta Portman's play, The Mourner.
Bridget Dutta Portman, right on.
Yeah, I was in her play, The Mourner, at also at the Exit Theater, and I played a character called Sana. So that was the most recent theater work that I've done, but I was doing some film and television performing previously. So I have done some performing in the past. I think I'll do it again. It's just I'm I'm very shy on stage, so it takes me a while to build up the courage.
Yeah, and also you're a mom, so I'm sure you've been busy.
And I'm a
as
mom.
Well. Yeah.
There's that.
All right. Well, Naseem, for anyone who wants to connect to Naseem, we'll put your Twitter and your Snapchat, your information as well. And as we always say, we got to find a better sign off. All right, folks. Take care, everybody, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.